Now, there are a few things that we can do in, for example, a SQL query that we still haven't figured out how to do in MongoDB. One of those things is getting distinct values from a collection. This is where we can get all the values from a single field for each record in a SQL database and remove anything that's a duplicate. This kind of thing would be useful if, for example, you're calculating some statistic that you want to display to your users. It's actually very, very simple to do this in MongoDB. All we have to do is say db, let's go ahead and grab from the links, and let's say we just want to get all of the favorites values. So we're just going to say distinct, and we just pass it the name of the field that we want. So in this case, that's favorites. So db.links.distinct favorites, and as you can see here, we have just a simple array of all of the values of favorites in our database. Now remember that we had two different documents that had 100 as the number of times that link had been favorited. And as you can see here, the number 100 only appears once in this list. That is because we are getting distinct values. Now, something like this, you might not know how this would be useful, but if we wanted to show, for example, the last 10 different URLs that have been linked to from this website, and maybe we want to make sure that there are no duplicates. So if a given link is particularly popular on a given day, it'll only actually show up once in the list. We could do this by doing db.links.distinct on the URL field. And now if I could actually spell distinct correctly, you can see here that we get an array of URLs. Now, in this case, we don't have any duplicate URLs, but assuming we did, this could be an array of the unique URLs so that we could show maybe the latest 10 URLs that had been put into the system, something like that. So that's finding distinct values. That's pretty simple, but there's actually something more complex that we can do in SQL, and that's grouping documents. When we're using a SQL database, this is where we group bunches of rows into a single row based on a given value. So we can do this in MongoDB using the group method. And to this method, we're going to pass a single object. What we want to do here is find the number of times each user's collection of bookmarks has been favorited. So we want to find all of the links that user 1 has added to the system and basically sum up the number of times that someone has favorited his links, so we can see who the most popular users of our system are. Now, to do this in a SQL database, we would want to do some kind of grouping. So that's what we're going to do here. The object that we pass to group here is pretty complex, so let's go through it step by step. We're going to start with the key here. We're going to say user ID and set that equal to true. So this means that we want to group based on the user ID. So already we can see how this grouping is going to work. In the collection of documents that's returned, there's going to be a single document for each user ID that is in the links database. On our next line, we're going to have our initial object. This initial object is going to be what each one of those documents that's going to end up in our collection at the end is going to start with. We're just going to say fave count equals 0. And that's all we need to do for our initial document. Next, we need the reduce function. Now, this reduce function is going to be passed each document, and it's also going to be passed the object that will end up in the collection that is returned from this group call. Now, this reduce function is called for each one of the documents that are grouped by user ID. So let's say that we have maybe documents 1, 2, and 3 are all by the same user. Then the way this is going to work is the first time reduce is called, document 1 is going to be passed to this function, and O is going to be this initial value up here. Inside this function, we can do whatever we want to O based on doc. Then reduce will be called a second time with document 2, and then we can modify O however we want based on document 2. And we'll go through each one of the documents for the given user, and then we'll start all over with all of the documents for user 2, and we'll start with a fresh initial document here. So inside of this function, all we're going to want to do is say o.favecount, and we're going to add doc.favorites to o.favecount. And now finally, we're going to add a finalize method. And this finalize method is going to be a function that it's going to take that o object, and this will run after we have run the reduce function on every one of the documents for the given group, or for the given user ID in this case. And let's just find the name to match that user ID. Now, since the user ID will be applied to this initial object because it is the key that we're sorting by, what we can do here is say db.users. Actually, no, before this, we want to say o.name equals db.users.find1, and we want to find where the underscore ID is equal to the object.user ID, and then we just want to get the name on that. And remember, we can get the name directly from what's returned here because we're using find1. So let me make sure I'm not messing up my curly braces here. That looks good, and that's actually all we need to put in this, so I can go ahead and close off our call to db.links.group. And it looks like I made a mistake somewhere. Let me see. Oh, and the problem here is that I only put a single curly brace right here. And this is the curly brace to close off our function, but I never added the curly brace to close our group object. All right, and so now I'll just remember to put that closing curly and close the parentheses. And now when I hit enter, you can see that we have 3 different objects here. Now we have 3 different objects because there's 3 different user IDs found within the documents inside of our links collection. And that is the key that we told the group method to group by. So we have 3 different documents, each with the user ID that it found. Then you can see fav count here seems to be the sum of all of the favorites for each one of the links that those users had. And then in the finalize method, we were able to grab the name for that user. And so now we can see which user has the most popular bookmarks on our site. And I think you can see where this kind of thing would be useful in creating some kind of a leaderboard or a statistics layout. Now, although this seems to be a pretty long query as queries go for what we've been using in MongoDB, this is actually a pretty simple way of using the group command. There's actually 1 or 2 other parameters that we could put into this object here, but I'll leave that for you to discover as you need more from MongoDB, are the ones you're going to find most useful. Okay, let's wrap this up by looking at how we can use regular expressions inside of our queries. It's really actually pretty simple. Let's say db.links.find, and we want to find all the documents where the title equals what? Well, in this case, let's use a regular expression. It's actually really simple. We could just say tuts \+ $, and this will find for us all of the links whose titles end in tuts plus. So if I go ahead and hit enter here, and that's a bit much to deal with, so let's go ahead and single this down to just the titles. Then you can see here that we have nettuts, psdtuts, and mobiletuts. So as you can see, that's a very simple and very easy way to use regular expressions. However, if you want to use other operators on a given field as well as a regular expression, what you need to do is use the $regex operator for the regular expression. So I could go ahead and just do this, and as you can see, we get the very same results. The only difference here is we're passing an object to title, and it has a property named regex and a value, which is the regular expression. But what we can do now is have other values. So for example, let's say I want to have the title match that regular expression, but I also want to make sure that title is not equal to mobiletuts. For example, if I do that, you can see that we're only returned nettuts and psdtuts. We don't have mobiletuts because we're using the not equals operator on this title as well. So just note that while you can group regular expressions with some of the other operators we've looked at, when you do that, you do have to include the regex operator explicitly like that. So with these querying techniques under your belt, I think you'll have no trouble getting exactly what you want out of your MongoDB collections. However, it is possible to continue manipulating the results of your query even after you've got them back. So that's what we're going to look at in the next screencast.